All right, here we are. This is Jay Brown Yoga Talks podcast. My name is Jay Brown. Welcome to anyone who's new to the show today. And thanks and what's up to all the rest of y'all. How are we? Are we doing okay? It's not always that easy to tell, is it? Well, I have to tell you, the pendulum has been swinging, my friends. The pendulum has been swinging. If you were here last week, you know I was right up against it. It was right at the end of the week. It was late night. I was probably talking way too much. And then this week, it's midday, midweek, and I'm under like a kind of tight schedule, so I'm not going to be able to talk too much today at all. And it's for the best. But it's a totally different vibe, you know? It's like, I'm just not used to recording this early in the week. Normally, I never would record this early on. I wait till the end of the week and I kind of reflect back on everything that happened. But now I'm in the middle of it. There's no reflecting. I'm not in a reflecting place right now. But like I said, it's fine because really today's episode with Mary Taylor and Richard Freeman really ought to just stand all on its own. Doesn't need me getting in the way. And you know, me choosing to do this right now is because I know that there's some circumstances at the end of the week that are going to get in the way with me recording when I normally would. And I could foresee that I was going to end up in that up against it late night place. And I promised myself last week that I wasn't going to do that again. So by making myself do it right now, even though it feels like kind of a weird vibe and not my usual place to be doing this, if I do it now, then I'm going to save myself that trouble later on. You see, I'm being skillful in my actions, which is totally relevant to today's conversation about the Bhagavad Gita. And that we will be having that conversation about the Bhagavad Gita with Mary Taylor and Richard Freeman was quite a convergence for me, honestly, because just, I don't know, like a month or two ago, I revisited the Bhagavad Gita just for myself. You see, I have a friend named Chase Bossart. He's been on the show a couple of times, very special episodes. I would encourage you to go back and listen to them. We spoke primarily about Patanjali's Yoga Sutra. But when I had a yoga center back in Brooklyn, as part of my teacher training, I used to fly Chase in to give teachings about sutras, but also about the Bhagavad Gita. And not too long ago, I went back and I looked at all my notes and I actually watched a bunch of video I had taken of him. And I just thought about the Bhagavad Gita in a new way, and it resonated with me in a deeper way for the first time, because honestly, I've never really been all that into the Gita, and I talk about that with Mary and Richard a little bit. But for some reason, in the midst of everything that's going on right now, and just wherever I am, I'm sure a lot of us have been, doing a little bit of study here or there. You got some time, and I looked at the Gita, and I saw something different in it. And at the same moment as that was sort of happening for me, I got an email about a new book that Richard Freeman and Mary Taylor were putting out about the Bhagavad Gita. So I reached out and I managed to get them to come on and talk to us about it. Now, I haven't had a chance to read their book yet, so I had to learn about it from them in the same way that you will today. But I took it as an opportunity to compare the notes that I had just made myself about the text with what they were writing about it. And it was a delightful and I think provocative way to frame the text that is utterly relevant to our current situation. So I was very happy to have had this chance to connect with them, and I'm excited that you're going to get to hear it today. Real quick before we do, I'm wondering if anybody listening to this is still trying to figure out how to get together some kind of system to register people for classes and coordinate it with your Zoom links. Or maybe you're a yoga center owner who's planning how you're going to open back up again. Or maybe you're somebody who's starting something new. Or maybe you are already opened up again. I know that's happened at a few places. And maybe you're paying a buttload for your studio management software. If you are any of those people, I want to suggest that you take this moment to look at today's sponsor, KarmaSoft. Longtime listeners, you've heard me talk about KarmaSoft a lot because they've been our longest standing sponsor, and it is the studio management software that I used when I had my center in Brooklyn. I know the owner, Rudy Senecal. You can go back and listen to the episode we recorded. He runs a company in a way that I think is what you need right now. I mean, if there's one thing that we've learned at like big corporatized, monopolized services that we become beholden to, like, it's not a good place for us to be. And I think what Rudy does at KarmaSoft is work with people on an individual basis more, and just has a way of relating to customers that I think is more in line with what we do as teachers. So like I said, maybe now's the time to go check out KarmaSoft. Go to karmasoftonline.com. Also, this episode is brought to you in support by Podcast Premium subscribers like Scott Stiles and Karina Clark. We are very grateful to Scott and Karina and to everyone else who has decided to become a Podcast Premium subscriber. Not only is it a way for you to have access to the full archives of this show, but it is also a way for you to help support and sustain it. It is a choose your rate, and if you are really in a hard place and you don't have any money at all, just email us and we will totally hook you up. But by doing that, you really will make a difference, and we are incredibly grateful. You can learn more about becoming a Podcast Premium subscriber at jbrownyoga.com. Lastly, I want to give a heads up to all y'all, especially longtime listeners. If you've been around, you've heard me talk about my friend and partner in crime, Josh Citron. He's the guy who gave me the idea to start this podcast, honestly, who made me get online before everyone else did, who I've argued with over the years and then had to admit he was right about a bunch of shit. Well, Josh and I did a little trial balloon in my weekly teachers class recently where we decided to engage in some conversations with teachers and just like independent creatives in general about what Josh has been doing with me in terms of trying to find a way to do what you do as an artist and potentially be able to make some kind of living off of that in some kind of sustainable way that doesn't mean selling out. Like if you read my blog post about yoga being mainstream, like how do you operate not on the terms of the mainstream, but on your own terms? Well, we're going to start a new class, essentially, called the Yoga of Business, not the business of yoga, but the yoga of business, where we unpack some of the things that Josh has done with me. We potentially give individuals like an opportunity to show us what they're doing and to get like a treatment of ideas as to things they could try. So in any case, this is going to be coming up soon. We haven't really totally released it yet. There might be some information on the website. I don't know if it's going to be up by the time this goes out, but I'm kind of excited about it, and I've been thinking about it, and I know that I wanted to mention it to everybody to put it in your head that if you are interested in a conversation around how independent creators can do what they do in a way that has integrity and maximizes the possibility for there to be rewards, both like spiritually and financially, I think you might want to check out this upcoming class, Yoga of Business. So you can check on the website, see if it's there. If not, it'll definitely be there next week, just to put that in your brains. And other than that, we're good. Like I said, we're going to keep this brief because sometimes that's what you have to do. And we've got an episode to listen to. Let's go ahead and get to it. Let's listen to this conversation I had with Mary Taylor and Richard Freeman. Hi.
Hey there.
Hey Jay, how are you?
I'm doing okay, all things considered.
Yeah, there's a lot to consider, huh?
There sure is. Do you prefer the video on or off?
We don't care. Actually,
It doesn't matter to me. I have a thing about it. Like for me, what I'll do if you like it on, there's this little thing over here. If I click on it, it's called hide self view.
Yeah, we're happy to hide our self view. So we don't
well, if we're happy to hide the self view, then let's just turn the videos off. Because for me, I actually find that I've been doing so many of these video calls, as I'm sure you guys have now too, with this new situation that we're all in. Yeah, and I've done a lot of, there are situations where I have to have me on for like recording purposes. But when I'm just talking to somebody, I like to turn it off because I realize how much energy I spend either noticing myself there or trying not to notice myself there.
Yeah, or fixing your hair. I mean,
yeah, it's just a reflex, you can't. Oh.
Yeah. So I've been making a practice of when I really want to like have an intimate conversation with someone, turning my view of myself off.
Well, that's great. We're happy to do that. We were just saying, before you came on, the microphone was on, and I said, I don't think we have to look at ourselves. And then I said, oops, the microphone's on. So that's very good for us.
All right. So let's go ahead. We'll both turn off our videos, okay?
That's good.
Okay. We will hear you later.
Very cool. Well, thank you so much. And it's sort of an apropos beginning for us to talk about like technology and wanting to connect, because I've really been very hungry to try and connect with, I don't know, what I think of as my elders in the yoga world. And I mean that as a compliment. Please take it as such.
It's okay.
And I also want to say to you, Mary, that in the email that I wrote to you, when I wrote, I figured as much.
I'm joking.
I know, but I was really not thinking about your tech savvy. I was actually thinking about the fact that we're in this pandemic and we're doing all this distancing and isolating. So me asking you guys to not be in the same room was kind of like, oh, maybe it's more important for them to be in the same room than like better audio quality or whatever,
I was having pangs of separation just thinking about it, being isolated.
So in any case, I am so glad to get a chance to speak to you both. And I have to say that when I heard that you had written something about the Bhagavad Gita, I was even more intrigued to speak with you because that particular text, it's one that I sort of avoided for a long time.
Yeah.
And I recently revisited it, and I felt like it seemed more relevant in this moment than it has at other times in my life.
Indeed.
Yeah, because it describes our situation. We're in the middle of a crazy battle, inside and outside.
Yeah.
What do you do? Yeah.
Well, maybe we could talk about that today. But before we talk about that, I'm just curious to ask, I know you were traveling recently, but are you back home? Are you in Colorado now?
Yeah, we just got back 2 weeks ago. And we were out of the country for 8 months. And we were kind of stuck in Thailand for...
They closed the border of Thailand of our little island that we were on. So you really couldn't get on or off the island for a certain amount of time. And then it has become increasingly, slowly opening. So, but at this stage, if we wanted to go back there, they wouldn't let us back in. So we're hoping that will shift as well. But we, had not planned to be gone so long. And so many things here were
neglected.
Yeah.
That's the right word.
Yeah. Well, I guess that's what I was sort of getting to, because I don't know, there was a sort of track that a lot of teachers were on where there was a fair amount of travel involved in our teaching schedules.
Yeah.
And if you did international travel, I was doing a fair amount. It's all not, there's no international travel right now is out of the question. Even if you felt like it was safe, not that it is.
Right. It was a little bit, we had a lot of trepidation about traveling, and we had, masks and face shields. We did not have hazmat suits, though there were people in the airports with them, a few. And we were careful, there were certain airlines that were booking to full capacity and others that we chose to fly on that were, taking 60% capacity. And so it wasn't, and we flew into Seattle, which was not a huge hub of immigration. So we weren't having to be standing in line with lots and lots of people. So we felt relatively safe. But it was, that we had some second thoughts about it, because the island we'd been on had 7 cases of the virus in March, when 2 families had returned from France, and then nothing. So the island had been completely virus-free essentially since March. And yet still, it had been on lockdown. Most restaurants were not open. They were just beginning to, everyone, including babies and grandmothers and the entire family on a motor scooter, they'd all be wearing masks and
no helmets, but they'd have masks.
Right. So
it's so confusing. The whole situation is very confusing on a lot of levels. It's hard to discern.
Where are you?
I am in Pennsylvania. I had been in Brooklyn for a long time, and then 3 years ago in 2017, honestly, there were some life circumstances that were pushing me that way, but also just on some kind of intuitive level, I was like, it's time to leave here.
Yeah.
And in a way, I also, in that process, did end up transferring a lot of teaching work online and setting up a lot of online teaching 3 years ago. So I had things a lot more in place than a lot of other of my friend teachers who had to, quickly get something together with all the lockdowns.
Yeah, that's great. That's good.
Yeah, for us, it was like, we had to learn, how we didn't
really do much in the beginning. We were feeling that it was a time that, an opportunity to pause for students as well as teachers. Yeah. And then as it's gone on and on, we've slowly given in.
Yeah, I think it's true. I think a lot of folks did take some pause, but it's been like 6 months now. So I think a lot of people can't afford to take that long pause, and to try to, I think also even more than just whatever the money side of it. I know I have this weekly teachers class, where I have this weekly call with all of these teachers from around the world, and just wanting to feel like we can keep connecting with people and sharing in yoga with people, because that's such a part of our lives.
Exactly. And it, what's been really wonderful for us, we just finished this 2-week online course. And as part of it, we offered one-on-one, sort of Zoom calls with some of the students. And just, that connection and seeing, it's always been that way. When you see students, it's just so moving to see that people within their circumstances are coming to yoga. But now even more so, it's very poignant and very moving to see what people are experiencing. So we're, it's very motivating to us to stay connected.
Yeah, I think we have to. I've embraced the technologies, and I've certainly having very fruitful yoga with people via it. But more than ever, I'm deeply longing for being in the same room with people.
Yeah.
That's why I said to you, I figured as much, because I didn't want you guys to have to be in separate rooms. It's like we need to be in the same room together again.
Yeah.
Yeah, because there's so much of it that is, more subtle, just by a body posture or subtle movement that's communicated than we're aware of. But so I guess we're improving our verbal skills.
Yeah. Well, yeah, hopefully. I think there is certainly, again, I don't want to detract from the value of being able to connect with people who don't live where I live. And I will say, having used it for a while, I have people who've taken class with me in person, and then people who were attending online. And I have a projector, so I project my screen up on a back wall so I can see people bigger, especially when I have people in class with me. And I've had people who lived here in Pennsylvania become friends with people in Spain
Right.
through that, like they were in the same class together. So I've seen it really work on a lot of levels. But back to your point, there's something, we are like analog beings, and there's so much subtle, like you say, like just like pupil dilation and pheromones, or just like being in presence with people that I'm acutely aware of now.
Yeah.
Well, getting to the other part of why I was excited to talk to you, other than just connecting with you for a moment on all the craziness of this moment, we can come back to it in the context of the consideration of the Bhagavad Gita. I was curious to hear that you guys had written something. Honestly, I haven't gotten a copy, so I haven't had a chance to read it. So I'm going to have to learn a bit about it today with people who listen to this. I guess, first of all, I'm just curious, what made you decide to write something about the Bhagavad Gita? And is it a translation, or is it like a interpretation? What would you describe it as?
First, it's an interpretation and a new translation. So the first part of the book is how many chapters?
10.
10 chapters, looking at the Gita from different, I would say, almost distances or perspectives. And
it's not taking it verse by verse at that point, though it
quoting verses.
It does quote some verses, and it follows the trajectory of the book, but it's more of a it's been written in a way so that it's applicable to modern times rather than an analysis of the text. And then the second part.
Well, the second part is word by word. It's a full translation, and but it's one of the first things in the translation is I wanted to take out a lot of the heavily theistic kind of language that most translators into English use, where they're using terms that in the European languages remind you of the monotheistic religions, and just pretty much say what's actually there. And so it doesn't come across as if Krishna was the big boss, this fearful God. Although that viewpoint is explored very concisely in the Gita, that isn't what the book wants to present, because Krishna wants to be presented as the mystery of love itself, of relationship, rather than as the boss or the emperor or the scary this or the scary that. And so the book is really looking, our understanding is that the Gita is full of contradictions, paradoxes. It presents many different schools, and it's supposed to be a difficult text in that Krishna does not answer a lot of Arjuna's questions, but he's very playful, and he tries to get Arjuna to question initially the extremism or the one-sidedness of certain presentations that Krishna actually gives to Arjuna.
And so the first half is, in a sense, kind of casual and very much rooted in the modern day experience. With our interpretation, one of the things that we are hoping that, we sort of inspire people to do is to actually embody the teachings in some way. In other words, to look at how these teachings really are part of what we experience every day in our bodies. And that's how you really begin to understand some of these classic teachings is through the embodied experience. So at the very end of the book, as an appendix, we have a short section that takes the underlying themes within the Gita, like, interconnectedness or impermanence, and we have embodiment exercises that are, sort of an appendix to all of this. So it's a slightly different approach to the book than what is typically out there. It seems like we're hoping it's readable for people.
Well, I'm certainly intrigued. In particular, the idea that you chose to present like your understanding in more, I don't know what we say, layman's terms, or more easy to digest terms,
right?
Before you then decide to give the word for word translation that would be in that context. Because I think that's pretty important, because in my experience of the Gita, honestly, the first few times I tried to study it, I got very turned off because of the interpretations. As you said, they were very much about like renunciation of the world, and Krishna was, as you were calling him, the big boss. It wasn't being presented so much in this way that you're talking about as relationship. I have had someone teach a more interpretation like that, but it was very unconventional. And I'm curious about how you come by that. When I talked with this teacher about how he came by that idea, he said that it had to do with looking at the Gita in the context of the whole Mahabharata. That he said, if you know what happens in the story before and after the Gita, it actually informs what actually happens in the Gita more. Did you find that to be true? Did you consider the Mahabharata, or do you think the Gita could be like just extrapolated out as its own thing?
You can read it by itself, because most of the context of the Mahabharata is implied in a lot of Arjuna's difficulties. But if you know something of the Mahabharata, which is a very big book,
I think that's one of the reasons I was always so daunted by it. I was like, if I ever really want to understand the Gita, I have to go the whole Mahabharata, and that felt just like too much to ever take on.
Yeah, that's a few lifetimes. Sure. But what happens in the Mahabharata is, I think, that the poet Vyas, who is the composer, is very much is a very wise poet, and he's trying to do a very strong critique of this kind of nationalistic, racist tendency that appears in all types of cultures, and that and it is an inevitable dark side to different religions or religious views becoming too solid or fixed, not understanding the bhakti or the mysticism that they, if you do them completely or deeply, produces. And so I think the Mahabharata is a critique of the different Orthodox schools. The Vedic Orthodox schools is a critique. And for example, to be contemporary, Krishna, the word Krishna means black, but the blackness is always assumed to be like a very dark monsoon cloud. It's a very kind of luminous black. And the word for caste in Sanskrit is varna, meaning color. And so the caste system, people ask, well, what color are you? Are you white? Which is next to white and gold are very good colors to have. But if you're dark, that means you're lower caste or you're no caste, and you should just be working through this rather cruel system of slavery that the Orthodox interpretation of the caste system taught. And so it's it's very contemporary in that way. So if we say Black Lives Matter, Krishna was black. Now, isn't that funny? And he also he's also part of a tribal group in the Mahabharata that are considered almost indigenous persons.
And so it's just interesting that would be this, that's who is this, character within the story.
Yeah.
Like, why would the poet choose that particular person if they were buying into the complete system the way it
And the
was?
Gita, takes the idea of caste and tries to soak it in, like a true Brahmin is not someone Brahmin by birth, but it is someone who actually sees all beings equally. And so it's almost the opposite of what the Orthodox Brahmin is. And so in the Mahabharata, Yudhishthira, Arjuna's, who had become the rightful king after the bloody war that everyone knew was a disaster, and it turned out to be a disaster because they went ahead and fought anyway. He does a horse sacrifice, which I don't think Vyas, which is a literal horse sacrifice, and it was to say, yeah, we won. And there are all of these problems that appear because they tried to do it in an orthodox way, and they actually killed the horse. And then at the end of the sacrifice, a weasel comes out of the forest. And weasels are considered nasty creatures in Hinduism. Like if a weasel comes to your door, watch out, it's not a good sign. But this weasel was half gold, had a half golden body, and gave these beautiful talks to them, just saying how stupid their whole sacrifice was and that they didn't know anything and they were being selfish and literally tore them to shreds in the very words of Vyas. And all of these, and then at the very end, one of my favorite little parts is that Yudhishthira, so Arjuna's all passed away, all of his brothers, and he's on his way up in the Himalaya, and Indra keeps testing him to see if he's still envious of Duryodhana, the psychopath, the con artist Duryodhana, and to see if he holds any, envy of. And finally, Yudhishthira lets go of his anxiety over the false presentation that Indra showed him of Duryodhana sitting like another Indra, on a big throne, and which was just a hallucination. And then finally, Yudhishthira was, passing all the tests because what he really cared about was his family and then all these beings. And he had adopted a dog, earlier in the book, a really nice dog. And finally he passed the test, and Indra then pulls up in a chariot and say, hop on board, we're flying off, to heaven. And of course, if you've been reading the Gita closely, philosophically, wait a second, that's a projected concept. That isn't, the philosophically, the Gita has taken that whole idea that heaven is you're going to fly off to. And so Yudhishthira starts to get into Indra's chariot, and the dog was going to hop on too, because they were like best friends. And Indra said, "Oh no, dogs can't come," which in India, of course, people are not nice to dogs there. And Yudhishthira said, well, in that case, I'm not coming, because he wanted to be with his beloved dog. And he wanted to, so to him at that point, bhakti, and it turns out, that the dog was the god Yama, as all dogs are, if you really get to know them. And that the whole Gita is teaching that you see in the heart of every living being, the beloved, who is the Paramatman, or who Krishna actually is. And they're serious about that. And
so that background really helps you to read the Gita, because then you start questioning in a different manner.
Yeah, you question like the tendency towards orthodoxy but any school. So the last part of the Gita takes all these different yoga practices and looks at them in terms of how they get corrupted by ego, basically. And so, and that's even if it's a great tradition or great teachers, your ego can hijack it, and and start to exploit, even the greatest tradition or traditions are exploited. So,
well, what's most striking to me about what you said is that there's a kind of horrible irony in a way, that this orthodoxy that you're putting forth, the Gita is critiquing, that orthodoxy has held up the Gita as like their source text, and that's certainly happened in other ways in our culture, where it's basically like an appropriation of the text. Although I'm sure some people would just disagree with that interpretation. I guess because the most common thing I've ever heard about the Gita is that it was all about like doing your duty, right?
Yes,
right.
Exactly.
Like selfless giving up of yourself and duty, which never resonated with like my situation, Although I guess there's certainly a lot of room for interpretation there. So I guess,
and part of what is overlooked often is, what does dharma, what does duty really mean? And so again, there is this human tendency to want to become dogmatic and to want to have clear answers and to want to have a very small and specific duty. And our interpretation, which I'm sure some others will disagree with, but ours is that, these are things that can be both very good in terms of getting us to look more deeply and on a more sort of interconnected level. And they can, on the other hand, become sort of poles we hold on to keep our dogmatic or fundamentalist views solid and stable, because everybody, ourselves included, has within our personality and mind state the ability and tendency at certain times to become dogmatic, to become fundamentalists. Yeah. And so this is, if you look at it as a text that is inviting and challenging all of us to see that part of ourselves that tends to fall for cults, that tends to fall for dogma, and then
or formula,
yeah. Even on a smaller level, to then notice when that's happening and kind of laugh about it a little bit, the way Krishna smiles at and laughs a little bit at Arjuna when Arjuna is confused, and to see, oh, there I go again, drawing conclusions and not looking again more deeply.
And Krishna kept insisting that Arjuna follow his swadharma, which means your actual dharma, not the dharma that's being imposed. And then he even used the word, not the swadharma, but your swadharma. And he did that with the word self too, not your atman, but your atman, your true atman, who you actually are. You're not the body, you're not the mind, you're not any of these impermanent things. And so he kept playing, that game with Arjuna. And so Arjuna, and then at the end of the book, of course, the very end of the Gita, he says you have to give up all dharmas, which are all formulations, religious or, different patterns of organizing reality. All of these dharmas, even good ones, some of them are really good, you have to let them go. and just come to me, he said, because that's the point of all the dharmas. So you are releasing all these dharmas, and then taking refuge, in the beloved, or in Krishna. And that's the bhakti. And so, and it turns out, excuse me.
No, go ahead.
Arjuna is actually he's not just a warrior, but he is also a prince. And so part of his dharma is, and earlier in the Mahabharata, he's negotiating. He's a diplomat. And he's, trying to work out all these peace formulas and talking with everybody. And so that's part of his duty, is to try to negotiate and communicate. And that's his princely duty. So he's not just a police officer who's, supposed to smash. But then again, the book is true that in certain contexts, for the sake of others, you need to do your duty.
If you are hearing this message, then you're listening to the free version of J. Brown Yoga Talks. To hear the rest of our conversation, please subscribe to Podcast Premium at jbrownyoga.com/premium.